The moment my husband walked into my 53rd birthday party with his arm around another woman, introducing her as his business partner, I knew my carefully constructed life was about to implode. What he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment longer than he could have ever imagined, and the gift I had waiting for him would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Lisa Carter, and until 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. 25 years of marriage to Robert Carter, 2 successful adult children, and a beautiful home in Riverside, Connecticut that overlooked the rolling hills of our exclusive neighborhood. I spent my days tending to my prized rose garden, volunteering at the local animal shelter, and supporting my husband's thriving marketing company from behind the scenes. The perfect suburban wife, or so everyone believed. Robert and I had built what appeared to be an enviable life together. He was the charismatic businessman who could sell ice to penguins, while I was the steady foundation that kept everything running smoothly. I managed our social calendar, remembered every client's anniversary, and hosted dinner parties that had become legendary in our circle. The wives of Robert's business associates often commented on how lucky he was to have someone so organized and gracious by his side. But perfection, I've learned, is often just an elaborate facade hiding cracks that run deeper than anyone realizes. The first crack appeared 6 months ago, when I noticed Robert's behavior changing in subtle ways. He started working later, claimed more out-of-town conferences, and developed a sudden interest in upgrading his wardrobe. When I complimented his new cologne, he brushed off my comment with unusual irritation. The man who had worn the same aftershave for 15 years was suddenly experimenting with designer fragrances. Then came the phone calls. Robert had always been accessible, answering his phone regardless of the time or situation. But increasingly, he would step outside to take calls, speaking in hushed tones that ended abruptly when I appeared. When I asked about these mysterious conversations, he would dismiss them as boring business discussions that wouldn't interest me. The technology changes were perhaps the most telling. Robert, who had relied on me to help him with anything more complicated than basic email, suddenly became protective of his devices. His phone, once casually left on kitchen counters and nightstands, now accompanied him everywhere. He changed his computer password, claiming it was for security purposes related to client confidentiality. I'm not naive. After 25 years of marriage, I recognized the signs, even as I desperately hoped I was wrong. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the emotional distance that had crept between us like morning fog. But hope is a stubborn thing, and I clung to it even as the evidence mounted. The breaking point came 2 weeks before my birthday when I discovered a credit card statement Robert had forgotten to hide. Among the usual business expenses were charges that made my stomach clench. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together. Hotel rooms in cities where Robert claimed to be attending conferences, but the dates didn't match his calendar. Most damning of all, jewelry purchases from a boutique I'd never heard of, charged just days after Robert had told me we needed to be more careful with our spending. I confronted him that evening, my hands shaking as I held the statement between us like evidence in a courtroom. Robert's response was a masterclass in deflection and gaslighting. The dinners were client meetings, he insisted. The hotel charges were conference accommodations that would be reimbursed. The jewelry was a surprise for me, hidden away for a special occasion. His explanations were smooth, delivered with the same confident tone he used in business presentations. But his eyes wouldn't meet mine, and I noticed the slight tremor in his voice that appeared whenever he was lying about something significant. Still, I wanted to believe him. The alternative was too devastating to contemplate. Planning my 53rd birthday party became both a distraction and a test. If Robert was truly committed to our marriage, surely he would make an effort for this milestone celebration. I threw myself into the preparations with perhaps too much enthusiasm, booking the Riverside Country Club's elegant ballroom and inviting everyone who mattered in our social and business circles. Robert seemed supportive, offering suggestions and helping with the guest list. When I mentioned inviting his entire team from Carter and Associates Marketing, he quickly agreed, even suggesting we make it a combination celebration and business networking event. At the time, I thought his enthusiasm was a good sign. I was so desperately hoping for normalcy that I missed the calculation behind his eagerness. The guest list grew to over 60 people, including Robert's business partners, our neighbors, from Maple Ridge Drive, my book club friends, and both our children with their families. Marcus, our eldest at 28, was flying in from Boston where he worked at a prestigious law firm. Emma, our daughter, would drive up from New York City where she taught elementary school in Brooklyn. Even Tyler, Marcus's 16-year-old son, had requested permission to attend, claiming he wanted to celebrate his grandmother's special day. I spent weeks selecting the perfect dress, finally settling on a deep emerald green cocktail dress that complemented my auburn hair and made me feel elegant rather than invisible. Robert complimented the choice when I showed it to him, though I noticed his attention seemed elsewhere, focused on his phone rather than on me. The day before the party, as I was doing final preparations, Carol Peterson, my closest friend for over a decade, stopped by to help with the flower arrangements. Carol had always been more observant than tactful, a quality that sometimes irritated me but had saved me from numerous social disasters over the years. She was arranging white roses in crystal vases when she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I want you to promise you'll answer honestly." I paused in my inventory of the catering supplies, sensing something serious in her tone. "Of course, Carol. What is it? Have you noticed anything different about Robert lately? I mean, beyond the usual work stress." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. "What do you mean exactly?" Carol set down the roses and faced me directly. "I saw him last Tuesday at Bistro Laurent downtown. He was having lunch with a woman I didn't recognize. Very attractive, professionally dressed. They seemed quite comfortable together, very familiar. My heart began to race, but I kept my voice steady. That was probably Jennifer Walsh from his creative department. They've been working on several major campaigns together. Robert mentioned they've had a lot of client meetings lately." "Lisa," Carol said gently. They were holding hands across the table. And when they left, he kissed her goodbye. Not a business kiss. The crystal vase I was holding slipped from my hands, shattering against the marble floor of our kitchen. As I knelt to collect the pieces, I felt something inside me shatter as, well, the last vestiges of hope, perhaps, or the illusion that I could continue pretending everything was normal. Carol knelt beside me, helping gather the glass fragments. "I'm sorry. I debated whether to tell you, but I couldn't let you be blindsided. Not at your own birthday party." Too late for that, I thought, but said nothing. As we cleaned up the broken crystal, I realized that my marriage had been breaking just as silently, just as completely, one small fracture at a time, until the whole structure became too fragile to maintain. That evening, Robert came home later than usual, claiming he'd been finalizing details for a major presentation. He kissed my cheek absently, the same perfunctory gesture that had replaced genuine affection sometime over the past year. As he headed upstairs to shower, I noticed the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his shirt. I waited until I heard the water running before I allowed myself to cry. 25 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Me standing in our designer kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of our successful life, mourning the death of something I hadn't even realized was already gone. But as the tears fell, something else began to crystallize in my mind. A memory from the early days of our marriage, when Robert was just starting Carter and Associates marketing, and we were struggling to make ends meet. My father, who had built his own successful construction business from nothing, had pulled me aside during our first wedding anniversary celebration. "Lisa," he had said, pressing a manila envelope into my hands. "This is for you and Robert, but I want you to understand something. This is your security, your insurance policy. Don't let anyone, not even your husband, make you forget that you have your own strength, your own value." Inside the envelope were stock certificates representing a 51% ownership stake in what would become Carter and Associates Marketing. My father had insisted on being the primary investor in Robert's company, but he'd structured the investment so that I, not Robert, held controlling interest. At the time, it had seemed like an overly cautious gesture from a man who had learned not to trust easily in business. "But Dad," I had protested, "Robert is my husband. We're partners in everything." "And I hope you always will be," my father had replied. "But just in case life takes an unexpected turn, you'll never be powerless. Promise me you'll remember that." I had tucked the certificates away in our safety deposit box, essentially forgetting about them as Robert's business grew and prospered. The company that had started with my father's investment and my name on the controlling shares had become Robert's identity, his source of pride and primary focus. Over the years, as Carter and Associates Marketing expanded and became one of the most successful firms in central Connecticut, I had gradually faded into the background of the business narrative. Robert introduced himself as the founder and CEO. Business articles referred to his entrepreneurial vision and leadership skills. At company events and client dinners, I was acknowledged as Rob's wife, the gracious hostess who remembered everyone's names and preferences but had no official role in the business success story. But legally, technically, I owned 51% of everything Robert had built. The irony was not lost on me as I stood in our kitchen, planning his downfall with the same methodical attention to detail I'd once applied to planning his success. The morning of my birthday party dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect October days when the New England foliage provides a stunning backdrop for any celebration. I woke early, as I always did on important days, and spent an hour in my garden, deadheading the last roses of the season and finding peace in the familiar ritual. Robert was already gone when I came back inside, claimed he had last-minute details to handle at the office before the party. I used the quiet morning hours to prepare myself mentally for whatever was coming. If Carol was right, if Robert was planning to bring Jennifer Walsh to my birthday party, then he was either incredibly stupid or incredibly arrogant. Either way, he was about to discover that underestimating Lisa Carter was a costly mistake. I spent extra time getting ready, transforming myself from the comfortable suburban wife into someone who looked like she belonged in the boardroom as much as the garden. The emerald dress fit perfectly, and I paired it with the diamond earrings Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, back when such gestures still held meaning. As I applied my makeup with unusual care, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and saw something I hadn't noticed in years. Strength. Determination. The look of a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can't wait to celebrate you tonight, Mom. You deserve all the happiness in the world." If only she knew how prophetic those words would prove to be. Marcus called shortly after, his voice carrying the professional confidence he'd inherited from his father. "Mom, I'll be there by 6. Is there anything you need me to handle?" "Just be there to support your mother," I said, testing the words. "I have a feeling tonight is going to be more eventful than anyone expects." The afternoon flew by in a blur of final preparations. The caterers arrived at the country club, transforming the ballroom into an elegant celebration space. Carol stopped by to help me with last-minute details, her eyes constantly searching my face for signs of distress. "Are you ready for this?" she asked as we watched the staff arrange the floral centerpieces. "I've been ready for 25 years, I replied. I just didn't know it until now. As the sun began to set over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Whatever happened tonight, whatever Robert had planned, I was no longer the powerless wife who had spent decades making herself smaller to accommodate everyone else's needs. I was Lisa Carter, and I owned 51% of everything my husband thought belonged to him. It was time he learned what that really meant. The Riverside Country Club sparkled under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers as guests began arriving, for what everyone believed would be a typical celebration of another year in Lisa Carter's well-ordered life. I stood near the entrance, greeting each arrival with the practiced grace that had become second nature over decades of hosting social events. The emerald dress caught the light beautifully, and several guests commented on how radiant I looked, though none of them could have guessed the steel resolve that lay beneath my polished exterior. Emma arrived first, stunning in a navy blue wrap dress that complemented her teacher's salary, while still looking sophisticated enough for the country club setting. My daughter had inherited my eye for appropriate attire and her father's ability to command attention when she entered a room. She embraced me warmly, her perfume a comforting blend of vanilla and jasmine that reminded me of the little girl who used to help me bake cookies every Sunday afternoon. "Mom, you look absolutely gorgeous," Emma said, stepping back to admire my outfit. "That color is perfect on you. Dad's going to be speechless when he sees you." If only she knew how accurate that prediction would prove to be, though not for the reasons she imagined. I squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her presence. Emma had always been my emotional barometer, the child who inherited my sensitivity along with Robert's ambition. Tonight, I would need her steady presence more than she could possibly understand. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with his wife Sarah and their son Tyler. My eldest had developed into a formidable attorney, but he still carried himself with the slight stiffness that had characterized him since childhood. He was Robert's son in every way that mattered, from his analytical approach to problems to his unwavering belief that every situation could be resolved through logical negotiation. Tyler, however, was a different story entirely. At 16, my grandson possessed an emotional intelligence that often surprised the adults around him. He hugged me with genuine affection, his eyes already scanning the room with the observational skills that would serve him well in whatever career he eventually chose. "Grandma Lisa, this place looks amazing," Tyler said, gesturing toward the elegant decorations. "You really went all out for this one." "Sometimes special occasions require special efforts," I replied, my words carrying more weight than he could possibly understand. "Besides, your grandfather always says that appearances matter in business. Tonight, we're going to see just how much he believes that." The guest list read like a directory of Riverside's most influential residents. James Morrison, the bank president who had financed several of Robert's major expansion projects, arrived with his wife Patricia, who served on the hospital board, with me. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, whose medical practice had been one of Carter & Associates Marketing's first major clients, brought her husband along with congratulations and a beautifully wrapped gift. Carol Peterson appeared at my elbow just as the Hendersons, our next-door neighbors for the past 12 years, finished expressing their birthday wishes. Carol looked elegant in a black cocktail dress, but I could see the concern in her eyes as she surveyed the growing crowd. "Any sign of Robert yet?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of conversation and classical music. "Not yet," I replied, checking my watch. 7:15, and Robert was officially late to his wife's birthday party. In the old days, such tardiness would have sent me into a panic of apologetic explanations to our guests. Tonight, I felt only a cold anticipation building in my chest. David Mitchell, Robert's original business partner and the only person besides, my father who had invested in Carter & Associates Marketing from the beginning, approached with his characteristic warm smile. David had gradually been pushed out of active involvement in the company as Robert's ego and control issues intensified, but he remained a minority shareholder and occasional consultant. More importantly, he had maintained his friendship with me even as his relationship with Robert had cooled. "Lisa, you look absolutely stunning tonight," David said, kissing my cheek in greeting. 53 looks good on you, my dear." "Thank you, David. I'm so glad you could make it tonight. I have a feeling this is going to be a celebration no one will forget." Something in my tone must have caught his attention, because David's expression shifted slightly, his businessman's instincts picking up on undercurrents that others might miss. He had known me long enough to recognize when I was operating on multiple levels, and his eyes narrowed with curiosity rather than concern. "Is there something I should know about tonight's festivities?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that nearby guests couldn't overhear. "Let's just say that all will be revealed in due time," I replied, offering him a smile that held more mystery than warmth. "I hope you'll stay for the entire evening. I believe there may be some business matters that require your attention before the night is over." David nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that he understood more than he was letting on. Having worked with Robert for over a decade, he had undoubtedly witnessed my husband's capacity for self-destructive behavior when it came to mixing business with personal gratification. The ballroom continued to fill with guests, each arrival adding another layer to the evening's carefully orchestrated drama. I moved through the crowd with the skills I had perfected over years of corporate entertaining, remembering everyone's names, asking about their children and recent vacations, playing the role of gracious hostess while my mind remained focused on the confrontation that was inevitable. At 7:30, just as I was beginning to wonder if Robert would have the audacity to miss his wife's birthday party entirely, I saw him enter through the main doors of the ballroom. He looked handsome in his charcoal gray suit, the one I had helped him select for important client presentations. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the confident bearing that had attracted me when we first met 26 years ago. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, was a woman I recognized from company photographs and social media profiles. Jennifer Walsh was younger than me by at least 5 years, with honey blonde hair, styled in a sophisticated bob, and the kind of effortless elegance that came from a lifetime of privilege. She wore a stunning red dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and she moved through the room with the confidence of someone who believed she belonged wherever she chose to be. The audacity took my breath away. Not only was Robert bringing his mistress to my birthday party, but he was presenting her as though she had every right to be there, as though her presence was perfectly natural and appropriate. The man I had supported for 25 years, whose business I had helped build through countless dinner parties and networking events, was publicly humiliating me at my own celebration. I watched from across the room as Robert began introducing Jennifer to our guests, his explanations smooth and practiced. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the carefully neutral expressions on people's faces as they processed this unexpected development. Some guests looked confused, others uncomfortable, and a few appeared to be connecting dots that painted an unflattering picture of my husband's character. Emma appeared at my side, her face pale with shock and anger. "Mom, what is she doing?" "Here? Why would Dad bring that woman to your birthday party?" "Her name is Jennifer Walsh," I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions churning inside me. "She's the senior creative director at Carter & Associates Marketing. Your father apparently felt it was important that she attend tonight's celebration." "This is insane," Emma whispered, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "How could he be so disrespectful? So cruel?" Marcus had noticed the commotion and was making his way toward us, his lawyer's training evident in the way he assessed the situation before speaking. When he reached us, his expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the anger simmering beneath his professional demeanor. "Mom, do you want me to handle this?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with barely contained fury. I can ask them to leave, quietly, without causing a scene. No, I said, surprising both my children with the firmness in my voice. Let them stay. Let everyone see exactly what kind of man your father has become. Sometimes the truth needs to be witnessed to be believed. Carol had appeared beside us, her face flushed with indignation. Lisa, this is outrageous. No one would blame you if you asked them to leave immediately. The nerve of that man bringing his mistress to your birthday party. Actually, I said, my voice carrying a note of satisfaction that surprised even me, I think this is perfect. Robert has just made my decision much easier. Before anyone could ask what I meant by that cryptic statement, Tyler materialized at my elbow. My grandson's teenage directness had always been refreshing, and tonight, it was exactly what I needed. Grandma, who's the blonde lady with Grandpa? She's not acting like a business associate. You're very observant, Tyler, I replied, patting his shoulder affectionately. That's something that will serve you well in life. Always trust your instincts about people and situations. Robert had finished his introductions near the entrance and was now scanning the room, presumably looking for me. When our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Perhaps he had expected tears, hysteria, or immediate confrontation. Instead, he found me standing calmly surrounded by my children and closest friends, watching him with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly fascinating social experiment. I excused myself from my support group and walked toward Robert and Jennifer, my head held high and my smile perfectly in place. The conversations around us gradually quieted as people sensed the approaching drama, the social equivalent of animals in the wild sensing an approaching storm. Robert, I said warmly, extending my hand to Jennifer as though greeting any other guest. I see you've brought Jennifer from the office. How thoughtful of you to include her in our family celebration. Jennifer had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, her confident facade wavering as she realized the awkwardness of her position. Robert, however, seemed to interpret my calm reaction as acceptance, even approval of his decision. Lisa, you remember Jennifer Walsh, our senior creative director, Robert said, his tone suggesting that this introduction was perfectly normal. She's been instrumental in landing several major accounts this year. I thought tonight would be a good opportunity for her to meet some of our friends and potential clients. The explanation was so smoothly delivered, so professionally reasonable, that several nearby guests nodded as though it made perfect sense. Robert had always been skilled at reframing situations to his advantage, presenting his choices as logical business decisions rather than personal betrayals. Of course, I replied, my smile never wavering. Jennifer, I've heard so much about your creative contributions to the company. Robert speaks of you constantly these days. Jennifer's cheeks flushed slightly at the implication in my words, but she recovered quickly. Mrs. Carter, thank you for including me tonight. You have a beautiful home, and this party is absolutely lovely. Actually, we're at the country club tonight, I corrected gently. But thank you for the compliment. I find that attention to detail is so important when hosting events, don't you? Making sure everyone understands exactly what role they're playing, what's expected of them. The double meaning in my words was clear to everyone within earshot, and I saw several guests exchange meaningful glances. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first sign that he was beginning to realize his strategy might have backfired. Well, Robert said, clearing his throat, perhaps we should let you get back to your other guests. I know how much you enjoy playing hostess. Oh, but I wouldn't dream of neglecting Jennifer, I replied sweetly. After all, she's taken such an interest in our family business. I'd love to hear more about her long-term plans with Carter and Associates Marketing. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched as Jennifer struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further compromise her position. She was intelligent enough to recognize a trap when she heard one, but trapped nonetheless by the public nature of the conversation. "I'm committed to helping the company grow and succeed," Jennifer said carefully. "Robert has been an excellent mentor, and I've learned so much from his leadership style." "How wonderful," I said, my tone dripping with false sincerity. "Robert does have such a talent for mentoring, doesn't he? He's always been generous with his time and attention when he finds someone who shares his interests." David Mitchell had been observing this exchange from a few feet away, and I saw him approach, with the purposeful stride of someone who recognized the need to intervene before things escalated further. His years in business had taught him to read social dynamics, and he clearly understood that this conversation was heading toward dangerous territory. "Lisa," David said, inserting himself into our small circle, "I hate to interrupt, but several people have been asking about dinner service. Should I let the catering staff know we're ready to begin?" "Actually, David, I think we should wait just a bit longer," I replied, my eyes never leaving Robert's face. "I have a few words I'd like to share with everyone before we eat. A little birthday speech, you might say." Robert's expression shifted to one of barely concealed alarm. He knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating with a hidden agenda, and the calm confidence in my voice was clearly setting off warning bells in his mind. "That's not necessary, Lisa," Robert said quickly. "Why don't we just enjoy the evening? No need for formal speeches." "Oh, but I insist," I replied, my smile becoming more genuine as I sensed his growing discomfort. "After all, it's not every day a woman turns 53, and I have so much to be grateful for this year. So many revelations, so many new understandings about life and relationships." Jennifer was looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally beginning to understand that she had been brought to this party not as Robert's triumph, but as evidence in a case she hadn't realized was being built against him. Her presence here wasn't a display of Robert's power. It was proof of his arrogance and his fundamental miscalculation of the woman he had been married to for 25 years. "I think I'll find the ladies' room," Jennifer said, clearly eager to escape the escalating tension. "Excuse me." As she walked away, her red dress a splash of color against the elegant neutral tones of the ballroom, I felt a moment of almost pity for her. She was about to discover that being the other woman was a far more precarious position than she had imagined, especially when the wife you're trying to replace holds cards you never knew existed. Robert watched her go, his confident facade finally beginning to crack. When he turned back to me, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty about his ability to control the situation. "Lisa, perhaps we should discuss this privately," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This isn't the time or place for whatever you're planning." "On the contrary, Robert," I replied, my voice carrying clearly enough for nearby guests to overhear. "I think this is exactly the right time and place. After all, you chose to make our private business public by bringing Jennifer here tonight. It seems only fair that I should have the same opportunity to share some information publicly." David was still standing nearby, and I could see the wheels turning in his businessman's mind as he began to piece together the implications of what he was witnessing. As one of the original investors in Carter & Associates marketing, he had a vested interest in any drama that might affect the company's stability and reputation. "Lisa," David said quietly, "if there are business matters that need to be discussed, perhaps I should be involved in those conversations." "You absolutely should," I agreed, giving him a look that conveyed volumes about what was coming. "In fact, I think you'll find tonight's revelations quite relevant to your interests as a shareholder." Robert's face had gone pale, and I could see him beginning to understand that whatever was about to happen, he had walked directly into a trap of his own making. His decision to bring Jennifer to my birthday party hadn't been a power play. It had been a catastrophic error in judgment that was about to cost him everything he thought he controlled. The evening was far from over, and the real celebration was just beginning. The silence that followed my announcement seemed to stretch on forever, though it probably lasted only seconds. I could feel the weight of 60 pairs of eyes watching me, waiting to see what the scorned wife would do next. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few displayed the kind of morbid fascination that draws people to car accidents and courtroom dramas. I excused myself from the small group that had formed around Robert and me, walking purposefully toward the elegant marble bar that dominated one corner of the ballroom. The bartender, a young man who had been working country club events for years, recognized the look of someone who needed a moment to collect themselves. "Can I get you something, Mrs. Carter?" he asked discreetly. "A glass of champagne," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "The Dom Perignon that Robert specifically requested for tonight's celebration." As I waited for my drink, I allowed myself a moment to truly absorb what was happening. My husband of 25 years had brought his mistress to my birthday party, introduced her to our friends and family as though her presence was perfectly natural, and was now standing across the room looking increasingly uncomfortable as the social implications of his choice became clear. The champagne appeared before me, golden bubbles rising through the crystal flute like tiny prayers ascending toward heaven. I took a small sip, savoring the crisp taste and the way the alcohol seemed to sharpen my focus rather than dull it. Tonight, I needed every advantage I could muster. Carol appeared at my side, her face flushed with indignation that she was struggling to contain in such a public setting. "Lisa, honey, are you all right? Because if you need me to create a distraction so you can slip out early, just say the word. No one would blame you for leaving your own party under these circumstances." "I'm not leaving," I said quietly, turning to face the crowd of guests who were trying to pretend they weren't watching our every move. "This is my party, Carol. These are my friends, my family, my celebration. If anyone should leave, it certainly isn't going to be me." Emma had been circulating through the crowd, and I could see her making her way back toward me with the determined stride she had inherited from her father. When she reached the bar, her cheeks were pink with embarrassment and anger. "Mom, I've been talking to some of the guests," she said, keeping her voice low but unable to hide her fury. "Everyone is talking about Dad and that woman. The Hendersons are asking if you and Dad are getting divorced. Mrs. Chen wanted to know if they should. Pretend they didn't notice anything unusual. This is humiliating." "For whom?" I asked mildly, taking another sip of champagne. "I'm not the one who brought a mistress to a family celebration. I'm not the one who's making a public spectacle of my private indiscretions." Tyler had been hovering near the dessert table, but I could see him edging closer to our conversation, with the determined eavesdropping skills that most teenagers perfect by his age. When he was close enough to hear, he abandoned all pretense of casualness. "Grandma Lisa, are you going to let him get away with this?" Tyler asked, his 16-year-old sense of justice clearly offended by what he was witnessing. "Because if you don't do something, everyone's going to think you're okay with being treated like this." Out of the mouths of babes, I thought, smiling at my grandson's fierce loyalty. Tyler had always been more perceptive than the adults gave him credit for, and tonight his teenage directness was exactly what I needed to hear. "You're absolutely right, Tyler," I said, placing my hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable for everyone else, especially when it's uncomfortable for everyone else." Marcus had been engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with his father near the entrance to the ballroom, but I could see him breaking away from that discussion and heading in our direction. His lawyer's training was evident in the controlled way he moved through the crowd, acknowledging greetings without allowing himself to be drawn into extended conversations. When he reached us, his expression was grim. "Mom, I just talked to Dad. He claims this whole situation is a misunderstanding, that Jennifer is here purely in a professional capacity to meet potential clients. He says you're overreacting to what should be seen as a business opportunity." I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its genuine amusement. "A business opportunity? Is that what he's calling it now? That's what he told me, Marcus said, though his tone suggested he found the explanation as implausible as I did. He also asked me to convince you not to make a scene tonight. He's concerned about the impact on his professional reputation if there's any kind of public confrontation. His professional reputation, I repeated slowly, as though testing the words for hidden meaning. How interesting that he's suddenly concerned about appearances after spending the evening flaunting his affair in front of everyone we know. David Mitchell had been observing our family conference from across the room, and I saw him approaching with the measured steps of someone who had made a decision about how to handle a delicate situation. His years in business had taught him when to intervene and when to let events play out naturally. "Lisa," David said when he reached our small group, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about business matters that might require my attention tonight. As a minority shareholder in Carter and Associates Marketing, I have certain rights and responsibilities that I may need to exercise." The implications of his statement weren't lost on me. David was positioning himself as an ally, offering to use his business relationship with Robert as leverage if the situation required it. More importantly, he was signaling that he understood there were larger issues at play than simple marital infidelity. "I appreciate your concern, David," I replied carefully. "And I think you're right that tonight's events may have business implications that extend beyond personal relationships." Across the room, I could see Robert in animated conversation with Jennifer, their heads bent close together in the kind of intimate discussion that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. Several guests had noticed their body language, and I watched as whispered conversations spread through the crowd like ripples on a pond. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, whose medical practice had been one of Robert's earliest major clients, approached our group with the careful neutrality of someone trying to navigate an awkward social situation. She had always been direct in her communication style, a quality that had served her well in both medicine and business. "Lisa, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I'm concerned about you," Dr. Chen said, her voice pitched low enough that only our small circle could hear. "If there's anything you need, any kind of support, I want you to know that you have friends here who care about your well-being." "Thank you, Elizabeth," I said, touched by her genuine concern. "That means more to me than you know, and I hope you'll remember that friendship when certain business relationships need to be reevaluated in the coming weeks." Dr. Chen's eyes sharpened with understanding. She was intelligent enough to recognize that my words carried implications beyond personal drama, and her expression suggested that she was already considering how tonight's events might affect her professional relationship with Carter and Associates Marketing. The catering staff had been circulating with appetizers and drinks, but I noticed they were beginning to look toward me expectantly. As the hostess, I would normally signal when dinner service should begin. Tonight, however, I had different plans for the evening's schedule. I moved away from the bar, walking toward the small raised platform at one end of the ballroom where the country club typically positioned speakers during formal events. The platform wasn't large, but it was sufficient to elevate someone above the crowd and ensure that their voice would carry throughout the room. As I stepped onto the platform, conversations gradually quieted and faces turned in my direction. Robert had been in mid-sentence with Jennifer, but I saw him stop speaking abruptly when he realized what I was doing. His face went pale, and he took a half step toward the platform before stopping, apparently recognizing that any attempt to interrupt me now would only make the situation worse. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the elegant ballroom. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate my 53rd birthday. It means so much to have friends and family gather to mark this milestone in my life." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, though I could see the tension in many faces as people wondered where this speech was heading. Robert had moved closer to the platform, positioning himself where he could intervene if necessary. But his expression suggested he was afraid of what was coming. Birthdays are interesting occasions, I continued, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room and make eye contact with as many guests as possible. They provide an opportunity to reflect on the past year, to consider what we've learned about ourselves and the people in our lives. This year has been particularly enlightening for me. Jennifer had positioned herself near the back of the room, perhaps hoping to make a quiet exit if the situation became too uncomfortable. But her red dress made her impossible to miss, and I could see several guests glancing between her and Robert as they began to understand the subtext of my words. 25 years ago, I made the choice to dedicate my life to supporting my husband's dreams and ambitions, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I believed that marriage was about partnership, about two people working together toward common goals. I believed that love meant putting your family's needs ahead of your own desires. The room had grown completely silent now, with even the catering staff pausing in their work to listen. I could see Emma watching me with a mixture of pride and concern, while Tyler was grinning as though he was finally about to witness the justice he had been demanding. I supported Robert through the early struggles of building Carter & Associates marketing, I continued, letting my eyes find his face in the crowd. I hosted countless dinner parties to help him network with potential clients. I managed our household so he could focus entirely on growing his business. I postponed my own educational goals and career aspirations because I believed his success would be our success. Robert's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He was trapped between his desire to stop me from continuing and his recognition that any intervention would only confirm what everyone was already beginning to suspect. But tonight, I've realized something important about the nature of partnership, I said, my voice taking on a note of steel that I hadn't known I possessed. True partnership requires honesty, respect, and mutual consideration. It requires acknowledging each person's contributions to the shared enterprise. And it absolutely requires fidelity to the commitments you've made. A murmur ran through the crowd as the implications of my words became unmistakable. Several guests glanced toward Jennifer, who had gone pale and was clearly looking for an exit strategy. Robert has apparently decided that 25 years of marriage and partnership weren't sufficient to ensure his loyalty, I continued, my voice carrying an edge of sadness mixed with determination. He has chosen to pursue other interests, other relationships, other priorities. And tonight, he has chosen to make that betrayal public by bringing his mistress to my birthday celebration. The collective intake of breath from the crowd was audible. Whatever people had suspected based on Robert's introduction of Jennifer, having it stated so directly was still shocking. I could see faces turning toward Robert, waiting for his response, his denial, his explanation. But Robert remained silent, his face a mask of barely controlled fury and embarrassment. He couldn't deny what was obviously true, and any attempt to minimize or explain his actions would only make him look worse. However, I said, allowing a smile to cross my face for the first time since beginning my speech, Robert has made a fundamental miscalculation tonight. He has assumed that humiliating me publicly would somehow strengthen his position, would demonstrate his power and control over our relationship. I paused, letting the silence build as I prepared to deliver the revelation that would change everything. What Robert doesn't realize is that bringing Jennifer here tonight has actually provided me with the perfect opportunity to share some information that I've been keeping private. Information about the true ownership structure of Carter & Associates. Marketing. David Mitchell's head snapped up, his businessman's instincts immediately recognizing the significance of what I was about to reveal. Several other guests who had business relationships with Robert looked suddenly alert, sensing that this personal drama was about to have professional implications. You see, I continued, my voice now carrying the confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. When Robert started his company 25 years ago, he needed investors. My father, who built his own successful construction business, was generous enough to provide the primary funding for Carter and Associates marketing. Robert was shaking his head slightly, as though he could somehow prevent me from revealing what came next. But there was no stopping me now. The truth had been contained for too long, and tonight seemed like the perfect time to set it free. However, my father was also a cautious businessman who believed in protecting his investments, I said, my smile growing wider as I watched understanding dawn on several faces in the crowd. When he structured his investment in Robert's company, he made sure that the controlling interest would belong to someone he trusted completely. Someone who would protect the business and ensure it was run with integrity. The silence in the room was now complete, broken only by the sound of Jennifer's heels clicking rapidly across the marble floor as she finally made her escape through the ballroom's side door. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising my champagne. Glass in a toast, I am the majority shareholder of Carter and Associates Marketing. I own 51% of the company that Robert has spent 25 years building. And after tonight's display of judgment and character, I think it's time I took a more active role in the business operations. The explosion of shocked murmurs and gasps that followed my announcement was everything I had hoped for, and more. I could see Robert's face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear as the full implications of my revelation sank in. David Mitchell was the first to recover from the shock, and I saw him begin to smile as he realized how completely the power dynamic had just shifted. The real celebration was just beginning. The aftermath of my revelation hit the ballroom like a tidal wave. Conversations erupted in pockets throughout the room as guests processed what they had just heard. Some faces showed shock. Others displayed calculating expressions as they considered the business implications of what I had revealed. Robert stood frozen near the front of the room, his mouth slightly open as though he was struggling to form words that wouldn't come. I stepped down from the platform with deliberate calm, my champagne glass still in hand, and walked directly toward my husband. The crowd parted before me like theater curtains, creating a clear path between us. With each step, I could feel the weight of decades of deference and accommodation lifting from my shoulders, replaced by something I had almost forgotten I possessed, my own power. When I reached Robert, he was still staring at me with an expression that cycled between disbelief and fury. His face had gone from pale to flushed, and I could see a vein pulsing at his temple that appeared whenever he was under extreme stress. "Lisa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What have you done?" "I've told the truth," I replied calmly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Something that's been in short supply in our marriage lately." Robert glanced around at the watching faces, clearly aware that every word of our conversation would be dissected and discussed throughout Riverside's social circles for months to come. His public humiliation was complete, but I could see him struggling to salvage whatever dignity remained. "We need to talk privately," he said through gritted teeth. "This is not the time or place for this kind of discussion." "Actually, I think this is the perfect time and place," I replied, my voice carrying the confidence of someone who no longer feared confrontation. "After all, you chose to make our private affairs public by bringing Jennifer to my birthday party. It seems only fair that I should have the same opportunity to share information publicly." David Mitchell had pushed through the crowd and was now standing close enough to hear our exchange. His expression was one of barely contained excitement, the look of a businessman who had just realized that a situation he thought was settled had taken a dramatic turn in his favor. "Lisa," David said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the corporate implications of what had just occurred. "I think we need to schedule an emergency board meeting. As minority shareholders, we have certain rights that may need to be exercised immediately." "Board meeting?" Robert sputtered, finally finding his voice. "David, this is a personal matter between my wife and me. It has nothing to do with the company." "I'm afraid you're wrong about that, Robert," David replied, his tone taking on the cold professionalism he reserved for serious business negotiations. If Lisa owns 51% of Carter and Associates Marketing, then she has controlling interest in the company. Any major business decisions, including personnel changes and strategic direction, require her approval. The crowd around us had grown larger as guests abandoned their conversations to witness this unprecedented confrontation. I could see Dr. Elizabeth Chen watching with particular interest, her medical training evident in the way she observed the dynamics between Robert and me, as though we were specimens in a fascinating case study. Marcus had finally made his way through the crowd, his face showing the strain of trying to process everything that had just occurred. As an attorney, he understood the legal implications of my revelation better than most of the guests, and I could see him running through the possibilities in his mind. "Mom," Marcus said carefully, "are you certain about what you just announced? Because if it's true, then everything we thought we knew about the family business is wrong." "It's absolutely true," I confirmed, reaching into my small evening purse and withdrawing a folded document. "I have the original stock certificates right here, signed and notarized 25 years ago when your father's company was incorporated." Robert's eyes widened as he recognized the documents I was holding. I could see the exact moment when his memory supplied the details he had apparently forgotten or chosen to ignore over the years. "Your father insisted on this arrangement when he invested in the company," I continued, addressing Marcus but speaking loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "He wanted to ensure that the business would be protected from poor decision-making or ethical lapses. Tonight, I think we can all agree that his foresight was justified." Emma had appeared at Marcus's side, her face still flushed with anger but now showing signs of pride as well. She had always been the more emotionally expressive of my children, and I could see her processing the revelation that her mother was not the powerless victim she had appeared to be. "Mom, this is incredible," Emma said, her voice carrying a note of admiration I hadn't heard in years. "You've been the actual owner of Dad's company this whole time? And you never said anything?" "I believed in the partnership model of marriage," I replied, looking directly at Robert as I spoke. "I trusted your father to make decisions that would benefit our family and honor the commitments we had made to each other. I never felt the need to assert my legal rights because I believed we were working toward common goals." Tyler had somehow managed to position himself near the front of the crowd, and his teenage bluntness cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "So basically, Grandpa has been running a company that actually belongs to Grandma, and now he's brought his girlfriend to Grandma's birthday party to celebrate?" Tyler asked, his voice carrying the kind of clarity that only comes from youth. "That's got to be the stupidest thing anyone has ever done." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd at Tyler's assessment, and I saw several guests nodding in agreement with his straightforward analysis of the situation. Robert's face had gone from flushed to ashen as the full implications of his predicament became clear. Not only had he publicly humiliated his wife, but he had done so while remaining completely unaware that she held the power to destroy everything he had built. "Lisa, please," Robert said, his voice taking on a pleading tone I had never heard before. "Let's discuss this rationally. There's no need to make hasty decisions based on emotion." "Emotion?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly for the first time all evening. "Robert, I've spent 25 years making rational decisions based on what I thought was best for our family. I've been rational while you've been having an affair. I've been rational while you've been lying to me about late meetings and business trips. I've been rational while you've been spending our money on gifts for your mistress." The crowd stirred at this additional revelation, and I could see several guests exchanging meaningful glances. The social implications of what I was revealing would ripple through Riverside's business community for months to come. "What I'm being now is strategic," I continued, my voice returning to its controlled tone. "As the majority shareholder of Carter and Associates Marketing, I have a fiduciary responsibility to protect the company's interests and reputation. And I'm afraid that recent events have demonstrated that current management may not be equipped to handle that responsibility. David Mitchell stepped forward, his expression showing the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching justice being served after years of frustration. Lisa, I want you to know that as a minority shareholder, I fully support any decision you make regarding the company's leadership, David said, his words carrying the weight of formal business declaration. I've been concerned about certain management decisions for some time, and tonight's events have only reinforced those concerns. Several other guests who had business relationships with Carter & Associates Marketing were now paying close attention to our conversation, clearly recognizing that they might need to reconsider their professional associations depending on how this situation resolved. James Morrison, the bank president who had financed several of Robert's expansion projects, stepped closer to our group with the careful movements of someone who was trying to assess a rapidly changing business situation. Lisa, James said diplomatically, if there are going to be changes in the company's ownership structure, I'd appreciate being kept informed. The bank has significant interests in Carter & Associates Marketing's continued stability. Of course, James, I replied, offering him a smile that conveyed both confidence and reassurance. I understand that any transition in leadership needs to be handled carefully to protect all stakeholders' interests. I'm committed to ensuring that the company continues to operate successfully under new management. Robert's face had gone completely pale at the word transition, and I could see him beginning to understand that this wasn't simply about exposing his affair. This was about the complete restructuring of his entire professional life. Lisa, you can't be serious about this, Robert said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. You don't know anything about running a marketing company. You've never been involved in the day-to-day operations. You're absolutely right, I agreed, surprising him with my ready acknowledgement. I've never been involved in the daily operations because I was busy managing everything else that made it possible for you to focus on the business. But that doesn't mean I'm incapable of learning or that I don't have access to qualified professionals who can help me. I gestured toward David Mitchell, whose expression was now openly triumphant. David has 25 years of experience in the marketing industry and intimate knowledge of our company's operations. I'm confident that under his leadership, Carter & Associates Marketing will continue to thrive and grow. The implication was clear. Robert was being removed from his position as CEO of the company he had spent decades building. The power dynamic that had defined our marriage and his professional life had been completely reversed in the space of a single evening. Carol Peterson had been watching the entire confrontation with growing amazement, and she now stepped forward to offer her support in the most public way possible. Lisa, I think you're making exactly the right decision, Carol announced, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. It's time someone with integrity and judgment took control of that company. Robert has clearly demonstrated that he lacks both qualities. The endorsement from my closest friend seemed to unlock something in the crowd, and I began to hear murmurs of agreement from various guests. The social tide was turning decisively against Robert, and I could see him beginning to realize that his reputation in Riverside's business community was being destroyed in real time. Dr. Elizabeth Chen moved closer to our group, her expression showing the kind of professional concern that suggested she was already considering how to protect our own business interests. Lisa, I want you to know that Chen Medical Associates has always valued our relationship with your family, Dr. Chen said carefully. We look forward to continuing that professional association under whatever new management structure you establish. The message was clear. She was already distancing herself from Robert and aligning with me as the new power structure became apparent. Other business associates in the crowd were undoubtedly making similar calculations about their professional relationships. Jennifer Walsh had long since disappeared from the ballroom, apparently recognizing that her presence was no longer welcome or advisable. I wondered if she had understood the full implications of what she was witnessing before she left, or if she would only realize later that she had attached herself to a man who had just lost everything. Robert looked around the room, taking in the faces of people who had been his friends, colleagues, and business associates for years. The expressions he saw clearly conveyed that the relationships he had built over decades were being reevaluated, in light of what they had learned about his character and judgment. "This is insane," Robert said, his voice now carrying a note of panic. "You can't destroy everything I've built because of a personal disagreement." "I'm not destroying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm protecting a valuable business from management that has demonstrated poor judgment and questionable ethics. The company will continue to operate and serve its clients. It will simply do so under leadership that understands the importance of integrity and accountability." Marcus had been silent throughout this exchange, but I could see him struggling to process the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew about his parents' marriage and his father's business success. "Mom," Marcus said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "What happens now? I mean, practically speaking, what are your plans for the company?" "I'm going to do what I should have done years ago," I replied, looking directly at Robert as I spoke. "I'm going to take an active role in protecting my investment and ensuring that Carter & Associates Marketing operates according to the highest ethical standards. And I'm going to make sure that the people who have supported this company over the years are properly recognized and rewarded for their contributions." The implications of my statement weren't lost on anyone in the room. I was not only removing Robert from his position, but also signaling that I intended to restructure the company in ways that would benefit loyal employees and business partners who had been overlooked or undervalued. David Mitchell stepped forward, again, his expression showing the kind of professional excitement that comes from unexpected opportunities. "Lisa, I want you to know that I'm prepared to assume whatever responsibilities you feel are appropriate," David said formally. "I have the experience and knowledge necessary to ensure a smooth transition and continued success for the company." "Thank you, David," I replied. "I'm sure we'll have many productive discussions about the future direction of Carter & Associates Marketing." Robert was now standing alone in the center of the crowd, isolated by his own choices and the consequences of his actions. The man who had entered the ballroom with such confidence, bringing his mistress to his wife's birthday party, as though it were a natural expression of his power, was now facing the complete collapse of everything he had built. The evening was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably, and everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The weeks following my birthday party unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, each step revealing another layer of the new reality I had created. The legal machinery that would formalize Robert's removal from Carter & Associates Marketing began turning the very next morning when I met with Susan Rodriguez, the attorney who would handle the corporate restructuring. Susan's office on the 15th floor of Hartford's newest high-rise building was a testament to her success in corporate law. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Connecticut River, and her mahogany desk was large enough to accommodate the mountain of documents we would need to review. "Lisa, I have to say, this is one of the most interesting cases I've handled in 20 years of practice," Susan said as she spread the original stock certificates across her desk. "Your father was remarkably prescient when he structured this investment. The documentation is airtight." I settled into the leather chair across from her desk, feeling more confident than I had in decades. My father always said that hope for the best, but prepare for the worst was good business philosophy. I never imagined I would need to use his insurance policy, but I'm grateful he provided it. The process of removing Robert from his position as CEO proved to be surprisingly straightforward from a legal perspective. As the majority shareholder, I had the authority to make executive decisions about company leadership, and Robert's employment contract contained standard clauses about termination for cause that his recent behavior had triggered. David Mitchell, proved to be an invaluable ally during the transition. His intimate knowledge of Carter and Associates Marketing's operations, combined with his genuine enthusiasm for implementing the changes I wanted to make, smoothed what could have been a chaotic reorganization. "Lisa, I've reviewed all the client contracts and vendor agreements," David reported during our third meeting that week. "The good news is that most of our major clients have expressed support for the leadership change. Several have actually mentioned that they're relieved to be working with management they can trust." The reaction from Carter and Associates Marketing's employees was perhaps the most gratifying aspect of the entire transition. Within days of Robert's departure, I began receiving emails and phone calls from staff members who had worked at the company for years. Their messages revealed a pattern of frustration and disappointment with Robert's leadership style that I had never fully understood. Maria Santos, the office manager who had been with the company for 12 years, requested a private meeting during my first week of active involvement. She sat across from me in what had been Robert's corner office, nervously twisting her hands as she struggled to find the right words. "Mrs. Carter, I hope you don't mind me speaking frankly," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to know that many of us have been hoping for change for a very long time. Mr. Carter, he was different when the company was smaller, but as we grew, he became more focused on his own interests than on taking care of the people who helped build the business." The conversation that followed opened my eyes to aspects of Robert's professional behavior that I had never witnessed. Maria described a work environment where favoritism determined advancement opportunities, where creative ideas were claimed by management without credit to their originators, and where loyal employees were taken for granted while flashier personalities received recognition and rewards. "Jennifer Walsh," Maria said, her voice taking on a bitter edge. "She waltzed in here 3 years ago and immediately became Mr. Carter's favorite. Suddenly, she was getting the best assignments, the biggest bonuses, invitations to client dinners that other senior staff never received. We all knew something wasn't right about their relationship, but nobody wanted to risk their job by saying anything." The picture that emerged from these conversations was of a man whose personal weaknesses had gradually corrupted his professional judgment. Robert's affair with Jennifer hadn't been just a betrayal of our marriage. It had been a betrayal of every employee who had worked to build Carter and Associates Marketing into a successful enterprise. I spent those first weeks conducting individual meetings with every department head and many of the company's longest-serving employees. The stories I heard were remarkably consistent. Robert had become increasingly autocratic, prone to taking credit for others' work, and willing to bend ethical guidelines when it served his personal interests. The creative team, led by Patricia Huang, a talented graphic designer who had been overlooked for promotion repeatedly in favor of less qualified candidates, presented me with a portfolio of work that had been misattributed in client presentations. "Mrs. Carter, I love this company and I believe in what we do," Patricia said during our meeting. "But I was planning to leave before you took over. The environment had become toxic for anyone who wasn't part of Mr. Carter's inner circle." These revelations about Robert's leadership failures made my decision to remove him from the company feel less like personal revenge and more like necessary business reform. The man I had been married to for 25 years had allowed power to corrupt him in ways that extended far beyond his treatment of our marriage. David Mitchell's transition into the role of interim CEO proceeded smoothly, helped by the enthusiastic support of employees who had worked with him during his earlier involvement with the company. His collaborative leadership style was the polar opposite of Robert's autocratic approach, and the difference in office morale was immediately apparent. "Lisa, I want to implement some changes that I think will help restore confidence in the company's values," David said during one of our early strategic planning sessions. "First, I'd like to establish a transparent promotion process based on merit rather than favoritism. Second, I want to create profit-sharing arrangements that reward all employees for the company's success, not just senior management." the changes we implemented over the following months transformed Carter and Associates marketing from a competently run but uninspiring workplace into an environment where creativity and collaboration flourished. Employee turnover, which had been climbing steadily during Robert's final years of leadership, dropped to virtually zero. Client satisfaction scores improved dramatically as account teams felt empowered to propose innovative solutions without fear of having their ideas appropriated by management. The social fallout from my birthday party revelation spread through Riverside's business community like wildfire. Within days, everyone who mattered in our professional circles knew that Robert Carter had been removed from his own company by the wife he had betrayed. The story had everything that made for compelling gossip: adultery, corporate drama, and a spectacular reversal of fortune. Carol Peterson became my unofficial intelligence network, reporting back on the conversations she overheard at the country club, the grocery store, and various social gatherings around town. "Honey, you should hear what people are saying," Carol told me over lunch at our favorite cafe. "Jennifer Walsh has apparently left town entirely. Someone said she took a position with an agency in Boston, but nobody knows for sure. And Robert is staying in that sad little apartment complex on the other side of town, the one that caters to divorced men." The image of Robert in a modest rental apartment, stripped of the trappings of success he had enjoyed for so long, should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, I felt only a hollow sense of justice served. The man I had loved for 25 years had become a stranger whose choices had led inevitably to his downfall. The business community's reaction to the leadership change at Carter and Associates marketing was overwhelmingly positive. James Morrison, the bank president who had financed several of Robert's expansion projects, called to express his continued confidence in the company under new management. Dr. Elizabeth Chen not only maintained her practice's marketing contract but recommended our services to several colleagues who were looking to change agencies. "Lisa, I have to tell you, the difference in service quality has been remarkable," Dr. Chen mentioned during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Your new team actually listens to what we need, instead of trying to impose their own agenda. It's refreshing to work with professionals who understand that the client's interests come first." These endorsements from long-standing clients helped establish my credibility as a business leader in my own right, rather than simply as Robert's replacement. The woman who had spent decades supporting her husband's career from the sidelines was discovering that she had her own instincts and capabilities that had been dormant rather than absent. Emma visited me regularly during those first weeks, bringing takeout dinners and helping me navigate the emotional complexity of my new situation. My daughter had always been more intuitive than her brother, and she seemed to understand that my victory came with its own set of challenges. "Mom, are you happy?" Emma asked one evening as we sat in my garden, watching the last of the autumn roses bloom before the first frost. "I mean, really happy, not just satisfied with how things turned out." The question caught me off guard because I hadn't allowed myself to consider happiness as a relevant factor in the equation. I had been focused on justice, on protecting my interests, on ensuring that Robert faced consequences for his choices. But happiness was something different entirely. "I'm not sure I know how to be happy yet," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty of the response. "I've spent so many years defining myself through other people's needs and expectations that I'm still figuring out what Lisa Carter actually wants from life." Emma's response revealed an understanding that I hadn't expected from my 24-year-old daughter. "Mom, maybe that's the point. Maybe happiness isn't something you figure out all at once. Maybe it's something you discover gradually as you start making choices based on what you actually want instead of what everyone else expects." Her words stayed with me as I continued to adjust to my new role at the company and my new life as a single woman. The house on Maple Ridge Drive, which had felt oppressive during the final months of my marriage, was beginning to feel like a sanctuary where I could explore interests and hobbies that I had abandoned years earlier. Tyler proved to be an unexpected source of wisdom during this period of transition. His weekend visits became highlights of my week, partly because his teenage perspective cut through the adult complications that sometimes overwhelmed me. "Grandma Lisa, you know what's really cool about what happened?" Tyler said one Saturday afternoon as we worked together in the garden. "You didn't just get revenge on Grandpa. You actually made everything better for a lot of people." He was right, of course. The changes I implemented at Carter & Associates Marketing under David's day-to-day leadership had positive effects that extended far beyond my personal satisfaction. Employee morale improved dramatically when the company began offering better benefits and more equitable profit sharing. Several talented staff members who had been considering leaving decided to stay once they realized the new management valued their contributions. The company's reputation in the business community actually improved as word spread about our commitment to ethical practices and client service. We gained 3 major accounts in the first month after the leadership change, with 2 clients specifically mentioning that they preferred working with a company known for integrity. One of these new clients was Thompson & Associates, a law firm that had been considering Carter & Associates Marketing for their rebranding campaign, but had hesitated because of concerns about Robert's reputation for self-promotion over client service. The managing partner, William Thompson, was refreshingly direct about his reasons for signing with us after the management change. "Mrs. Carter, I'll be honest with you," Thompson said during our initial contract meeting. "We had concerns about working with your husband because we'd heard from other clients that he had a tendency to prioritize his own interests over his clients' needs. The change in leadership was exactly what we were hoping to see." The Thompson & Associates account became a showcase for the new Carter & Associates marketing approach. Instead of the flashy, ego-driven campaigns that Robert had favored, we developed a sophisticated, client-focused strategy that highlighted the law firm's expertise and commitment to their clients' success. The campaign's success led to referrals from other professional service firms who were looking for marketing partners they could trust. Marcus struggled more than Emma with the new family dynamics. His legal training had taught him to respect established power structures, and watching his father's complete professional collapse challenged his fundamental assumptions about success and security. "Mom, I need to ask you something," Marcus said during one of our increasingly frequent conversations. "Did Dad ever know about your ownership stake in the company?" "He knew," I confirmed. "But I think he chose to forget because it was easier to operate as though he had built everything himself. Your father has always been skilled at rewriting history to suit his preferred narrative." The conversation that followed revealed how deeply Robert's version of our family history had influenced both of our children's understanding of their parents' marriage. Marcus had grown up believing that his father was the sole architect of our family's financial success, while I had been relegated to the role of supportive wife whose contributions were pleasant but ultimately unnecessary. "I feel like I don't know who you really are," Marcus admitted, his voice heavy with confusion and something that might have been grief. "The mom I thought I knew would never have stood up in front of 60 people and destroyed Dad's reputation. The mom I thought I knew didn't own a multi-million-dollar company." His words stung because they forced me to confront how completely I had hidden my true self, not just from Robert but from my own children. The woman who had revealed her power at the birthday party hadn't been a new creation. She had been the authentic Lisa Carter who had been suppressed for so long that even her own family had forgotten she existed. "Marcus, I understand why this is difficult for you to process," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand that the woman who stood up at that party wasn't someone new. She was who I had always been underneath the role I played as your father's wife. I didn't change. I stopped hiding." The healing process between Marcus and me would take many months and several difficult conversations, but it began with his gradual recognition that his father's professional success had been built on a foundation that included significant contributions from others, particularly his mother. As Marcus learned more about the company's early history and my father's investment, he began to understand how completely Robert had written me out of the success story. The question of what would happen to my marriage remained unresolved for several weeks after the birthday party confrontation. Robert had made no effort to contact me directly, apparently understanding that any attempt at reconciliation would be both futile and humiliating. His attorney had reached out to Susan Rodriguez about a potential settlement, but the preliminary discussions made it clear that Robert was in no position to make demands. When Robert finally did attempt to contact me directly, it was through a handwritten letter delivered to my home 3 weeks after the party. The letter, written on hotel stationery from the modest inn where he was staying, was a masterpiece of self-pity disguised as contrition. "Lisa," the letter began, "I know that what happened at the party was unfortunate, and I take full responsibility for the misunderstandings that led to such an awkward situation. I think we both said things in the heat of the moment that we probably regret now." The letter went on to minimize his affair with Jennifer as a temporary lapse in judgment, and to characterize my revelation about the company ownership as an emotional overreaction to his personal failings. Most tellingly, Robert suggested that we could work together to repair the damage if I was willing to forgive and move forward. I read the letter twice, marveling at Robert's ability to reframe his betrayal as a mutual misunderstanding that could be resolved through my willingness to overlook his behavior. The man who had publicly humiliated me by bringing his mistress to my birthday party was now suggesting that I was equally responsible for the conflict because of how I had chosen to respond to his actions. I never replied to the letter. Instead, I forwarded it to Susan Rodriguez with a note asking her to use it as evidence of Robert's continued inability to accept responsibility for his choices. The letter became part of our divorce filing, demonstrating a pattern of behavior that made reconciliation impossible and justified the terms I was proposing for our separation. The divorce proceedings, when they finally began, were surprisingly amicable from a legal standpoint. Robert had no choice but to accept whatever terms I was willing to offer, and I found myself being more generous than he deserved, simply because I no longer had any desire to prolong our connection. "You're giving him more than he's entitled to," Susan warned me during one of our settlement discussions. "The prenuptial agreement you signed 25 years ago is essentially worthless given the revelation about the company ownership. You could leave him with almost nothing." "I don't want to leave him with nothing," I replied. "I want to leave him with enough to rebuild his life somewhere else, far away from mine. Generosity will serve my interests better than vindictiveness in the long run." The settlement I eventually offered Robert included a modest cash payment, equivalent to 6 months of his former salary, temporary alimony for 2 years, and his personal belongings from our shared home. In exchange, he would relinquish all claims to Carter & Associates marketing, sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement about company operations, and agree to relocate outside of Connecticut. The negotiations revealed just how thoroughly Robert had overestimated his leverage in our relationship. His attorney, a competent but unimaginative practitioner who specialized in routine divorce cases, had apparently expected to negotiate from a position of strength based on Robert's role as the family breadwinner. The revelation that Robert had no legal claim to the company that had provided our financial security left his legal team scrambling to find alternative sources of leverage. My client has contributed 25 years of his life to building Carter & Associates marketing, Robert's attorney argued during one particularly tense negotiation session. Surely that dedication and expertise have value that should be recognized in the settlement. Susan's response was swift and devastating. "Your client was an employee who was compensated for his services through salary, benefits, and performance bonuses over those 25 years. His employment has been terminated for cause, and he has no claim to additional compensation based on the value of work for which he has already been paid." The legal reality was stark and undeniable. Robert had no ownership stake in the company, no claim to its assets, and no right to ongoing income beyond what I was willing to provide voluntarily. His position was that of any other terminated employee, except that most terminated employees hadn't been fired by their own wives for bringing their mistresses to family celebrations. The house on Maple Ridge Drive became fully mine in ways that went beyond legal ownership. I spent weeks redecorating rooms that had reflected Robert's tastes rather than my own, discovering preferences I had suppressed for so long that I had forgotten they existed. The formal dining room became a library where I could read and study. The home office that had been Robert's domain was transformed into an art studio where I could explore the painting hobby I had abandoned decades earlier. The process of reclaiming my living space was both liberating and melancholy. Every room held memories of the life Robert and I had built together, and removing traces of his presence felt like excavating layers of my own identity that had been buried under years of accommodation and compromise. The master bedroom underwent the most dramatic transformation. Robert's oversized furniture, chosen to project an image of masculine authority, was replaced with pieces that reflected my preference for comfort and natural light. The heavy drapes that had kept the room dim and formal were replaced with sheer panels that allowed the morning sun to fill the space with warmth. Emma helped me with much of the redecorating, bringing her teacher's eye for color and design to spaces that had felt oppressive for years. Our shopping trips to furniture stores and art galleries became opportunities for conversations about identity, independence, and the courage required to live authentically. "Mom, do you ever miss him?" Emma asked one afternoon as we arranged books in the new library. "Not the person he became, but the person you thought he was when you got married." The question forced me to examine feelings I had been avoiding since the birthday party confrontation. Did I miss Robert? The answer was complicated because it required distinguishing between missing the man I had loved and missing the life I had thought we were building together. "I miss the partnership I thought we had," I said finally. "I miss believing that we were working toward common goals, that my sacrifices were investments in our shared future. But I don't think I miss Robert himself because I'm not sure that person ever really existed." The realization was both painful and liberating. The Robert I had loved for 25 years had been partly a projection of my own hopes and partly a performance he had maintained to secure my support for his ambitions. The man who had brought Jennifer Walsh to my birthday party was probably closer to his authentic self than the devoted husband he had pretended to be during our early years together. 6 months after my birthday party, I received an unexpected visitor. Jennifer Walsh appeared at my front door on a rainy Thursday afternoon, looking significantly different from the confident woman who had accompanied Robert to my celebration. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple black dress, and her previously perfect hair showed signs of recent stress. "Mrs. Carter, I know I have no right to be here," Jennifer said when I opened the door, "but I was hoping you might be willing to listen to what I have to say." Curiosity overcame my initial impulse to close the door, and I invited her into the living room that had once hosted so many of Robert's business associates. Jennifer perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, clearly uncomfortable, but determined to have her say. "I want to apologize for my role in what happened to your marriage," Jennifer began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew Robert was married, and I should never have allowed the relationship to develop the way it did." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, genuinely curious about her motivations. Jennifer looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "Because I learned something about myself through this experience. I learned that being the other woman doesn't make you powerful. It makes you disposable." Robert dropped me the moment it became clear that his affair would cost him everything. The conversation that followed was one of the strangest of my life. Jennifer Walsh, the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, was seeking something from me that she couldn't quite articulate. Forgiveness, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of the lessons she had learned through her own poor choices. "I'm not looking for absolution," Jennifer said as our conversation wound down. "I know I can't undo the damage I helped cause, but I wanted you to know that watching you handle everything with such strength and dignity taught me something about the kind of woman I want to become." Her words revealed an unexpected dimension to the aftermath of my birthday party revelation. Not only had my confrontation with Robert changed the trajectory of my own life, but it had apparently served as a catalyst for self-examination in other people who had witnessed the events unfold. After Jennifer left, I found myself thinking about the strange circular nature of consequences. Jennifer had entered my life as a source of betrayal and pain, but her parting words suggested that she had learned something valuable from witnessing the aftermath of her choices. Perhaps that was its own form of justice. The transformation of Carter and Associates marketing continued to exceed my expectations throughout that first year under new management. David Mitchell's collaborative leadership style, combined with my emphasis on ethical business practices and employee empowerment, created a work environment that attracted talented professionals who had been frustrated by the autocratic culture that prevailed at many competing firms. Patricia Huang, the graphic designer whose work had been consistently undervalued during Robert's tenure, emerged as one of our most innovative creative leaders. The portfolio she developed under the new management structure won several industry awards and attracted attention from national publications that featured Carter and Associates marketing as an example of how creative industries could foster talent rather than exploit it. "Mrs. Carter, I can't tell you what it means to finally have my work recognized and attributed properly," Patricia said during her annual performance review. "Under the old system, I was afraid to propose my best ideas because I knew someone else would take credit for them. Now I feel like I'm actually building a career rather than just collecting a paycheck." The change in employee morale had measurable effects on client satisfaction and business growth. Carter and Associates Marketing's client retention rate improved to 98%, and our new business development exceeded projections by 40%. The company that Robert had nearly destroyed through his personal failings was thriving under management that prioritized professional competence over personal favoritism. The success of the business transformation gave me confidence to explore other areas of personal growth that I had neglected during my marriage. I enrolled in a photography course at the local community college, joined a book club that focused on contemporary women's fiction, and began volunteering with a nonprofit organization that provided business mentoring to women entrepreneurs. The mentoring work proved to be particularly rewarding because it allowed me to share the lessons I had learned about building and protecting financial independence. Many of the women I worked with were struggling to balance career ambitions with family responsibilities, often making the same kinds of sacrificial choices that had nearly cost me my own security. "Lisa, how did you know when it was time to stop accommodating and start asserting your own interests?" asked Maria Gonzalez, a talented web designer whose husband was pressuring her to abandon her consulting business to focus on childcare. "I love my family, but I'm afraid that giving up my career will leave me completely dependent on someone else's goodwill." These conversations reminded me how fortunate I had been to have my father's foresight protecting me from complete financial vulnerability. Not every woman had access to the safety net that had allowed me to confront Robert's betrayal from a position of strength rather than desperation. "The key is to maintain your own sources of power and independence," I advised Maria and the other entrepreneurs in our mentoring group. "Whether that's through maintaining your own career, keeping your own financial accounts, or ensuring you have legal protection for your contributions to joint ventures, you need to preserve your ability to make choices based on your own interests." The irony wasn't lost on me that I was giving advice about maintaining independence to women who were struggling with the same issues I had failed to address in my own marriage for 25 years. But perhaps that experience of nearly losing everything because of my own compliance made me a more credible advocate for financial self-protection. Tyler, now 17 and preparing for college applications, had become one of my most trusted advisors on matters both personal and professional. His generation's comfort with challenging authority and questioning traditional power structures had influenced my own thinking about leadership and relationships. Grandma Lisa, you know what I think is the coolest thing about everything that happened? Tyler asked during one of our garden conversations. You didn't just beat Grandpa at his own game. You changed the rules entirely. You showed everyone that power doesn't have to be about controlling other people. It can be about lifting them up instead. His observation crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't been able to articulate. My approach to running. Carter & Associates marketing was fundamentally different from Robert's model. Where he had focused on personal advancement and individual achievement, I emphasized collaboration and shared success. Where he had guarded information and decision-making authority, I encouraged transparency and employee participation. The results spoke for themselves. The company was more profitable, more innovative, and more respected than it had ever been under Robert's leadership. My father's investment had protected more than just my financial security. It had preserved the potential for the business to become something better than it had been. The first anniversary of my birthday party arrived with surprising speed. I had initially planned to ignore the date entirely, but Emma convinced me that marking the occasion would be healthy and appropriate. Mom, you should celebrate, Emma insisted during one of our weekly phone calls. Not because of what happened to Dad, but because of what you discovered about yourself. You found your voice and your power. That's worth celebrating. The small gathering we organized was nothing like the elaborate country club event from the previous year. Carol Peterson, David Mitchell, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, and a handful of other close friends joined Emma, Marcus, Tyler, and me for dinner at my favorite restaurant downtown. The conversation was warm and genuine, focused on the future rather than the past. David raised his glass in a toast as dessert was served. To Lisa Carter, who proved that it's never too late to claim your own life and make it exactly what you want it to be. The sentiment was echoed around the table, but I found myself thinking about the broader implications of what had transpired over the past year. My birthday party confrontation with Robert had been dramatic, but the real transformation had happened. In the months that followed, as I learned to inhabit my own power and make decisions based on my own values rather than someone else's expectations. Marcus had gradually come to terms with the new family dynamics, though the process had required several difficult conversations about the nature of marriage, power, and personal responsibility. His initial loyalty to his father had given way to a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between his parents and the factors that had led to its collapse. Mom, I need to apologize for something, Marcus said during a private conversation after the anniversary dinner. When everything first happened, I thought you were being vindictive and unfair to Dad. I couldn't understand why you were destroying his life over what seemed like a personal disagreement. And now? I asked, curious about his evolving perspective. Now I understand that you weren't destroying anything. You were protecting something valuable from someone who was destroying it through his own poor choices. Dad had already damaged the company's culture and reputation through his behavior. You saved it from complete collapse. The recognition from my son meant more to me than I had expected. Marcus had inherited his father's analytical mind, and his ability to reassess his initial judgments based on new evidence suggested that he had also inherited a capacity for growth that Robert seemed to lack. The second year after my birthday party revelation brought new challenges and opportunities, as I continued to expand my role as a business leader and community member. Carter & Associates marketing's success had attracted attention from larger firms interested in acquisition opportunities, but I had no interest in selling the company that had become the foundation of my independence. Instead, I focused on organic growth and strategic partnerships that would allow the company to expand its services while maintaining the collaborative culture that had made it successful. We opened satellite offices in Boston and New York, staffed primarily by former employees who had left other agencies because of toxic work environments similar to what had existed at Carter & Associates marketing under Robert's leadership. The expansion strategy proved successful beyond my expectations. The company's reputation for ethical practices and employee-friendly policies made it a magnet for talented professionals who were looking for alternatives to the cutthroat culture that dominated much of the advertising industry. Within 18 months, Carter & Associates Marketing had tripled its staff and doubled its revenue while maintaining the high client satisfaction scores that had become our trademark. The success of the business provided me with financial security that extended far beyond my personal needs. I established a scholarship fund for women returning to college after extended absences. Remembering my own abandoned educational dreams and wanting to ensure that other women had opportunities I had missed. The fund provided both tuition assistance and practical support like childcare and transportation that often prevented women from pursuing their academic goals. The scholarship program's first recipient was Maria Santos, the office manager who had worked at Carter & Associates Marketing for 12 years while raising 3 children as a single mother. Maria had always dreamed of completing her business degree, but the combination of work and family responsibilities had made it impossible to attend classes regularly. "Mrs. Carter, I can't tell you what this opportunity means to me," Maria said during the scholarship award ceremony. "For years, I watched other people advance in their careers while I stayed in the same position because I didn't have the credentials to move up. Now, I finally have a chance to finish what I started 20 years ago." Maria's success in the program became a source of inspiration for other employees who had deferred their own educational goals because of financial or practical constraints. Several other staff members approached me about similar opportunities, leading to the expansion of the scholarship program and the creation of a corporate partnership with the local community college that provided flexible scheduling for working students. The personal cost of my transformation had been significant. My marriage was over, my relationship with Robert was permanently severed, and I had been forced to rebuild my identity from the ground up. But the benefits far outweighed the losses. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on my own priorities and values, rather than trying to accommodate someone else's agenda. The house on Maple Ridge Drive had become a gathering place for family and friends in ways it never was during my marriage to Robert. Emma brought her students for garden tours when they were studying plant biology. Marcus had started joining us for Sunday dinners, bringing Sarah and Tyler for extended conversations about everything from politics to literature. Carol Peterson and I hosted a monthly book club that had grown to include women from across Riverside who were navigating their own life transitions. The book club meetings had evolved into something more than literary discussions. Many of the women who attended were dealing with their own challenges related to marriage, career, and personal identity. Our conversations about the books we read often became conversations about the choices we had made and the lives we wanted to create for ourselves. "Lisa, your story has given me the courage to make some changes in my own life," said Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a psychiatrist who had been struggling with her husband's expectation that she would reduce her practice to accommodate his career advancement. "Watching you reclaim your power has shown me that it's possible to prioritize my own professional goals without sacrificing my marriage, as long as I'm married to someone who respects my ambitions." These conversations reinforced my understanding that my birthday party confrontation with Robert had been about more than exposing his affair or claiming my ownership of the company. It had been about refusing to accept a diminished version of myself and insisting on relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenient accommodation. The ripple effects of that decision continued to influence my life and the lives of people around me in ways I was still discovering. The woman who had spent 25 years apologizing for taking up space now chaired board meetings, made difficult decisions, and advocated for causes she believed in without seeking anyone's permission or approval. As I write this, nearly 2 years have passed since that transformative birthday party. Robert has relocated to Florida, where he apparently works for a small marketing firm in a mid-level position. We have no contact beyond the occasional legal document that requires both our signatures, and I have no desire to change that arrangement. Jennifer Walsh, I learned through mutual acquaintances, has indeed built a successful career with a Boston advertising agency. Whether she has applied the lessons she claimed to have learned from our experience remains to be seen. But I hope she has found a way to build her professional success on a foundation of integrity rather than deception. My own life has expanded in ways I never could have imagined during those years of quiet accommodation. I serve on the boards of 2 nonprofit organizations, have taken up photography as a serious hobby, and am considering pursuing the college degree I abandoned so many years ago. The woman who spent decades defining herself through other people's achievements has discovered that her own accomplishments are far more satisfying. Carter & Associates Marketing remains the foundation of my financial security, but it has become much more than that. Under David's operational leadership and my strategic oversight, the company has become a model for ethical business practices and employee empowerment. We've been featured in several industry publications as an example of how companies can balance profitability with social responsibility. The recognition has led to speaking opportunities at business conferences and professional development seminars, where I share the story of Carter & Associates Marketing's transformation as a case study in values-based leadership. These presentations have connected me with other business leaders who are working to create more ethical and sustainable approaches to corporate management. Lisa, your company's success proves that prioritizing employee welfare and ethical practices isn't just the right thing to do morally, said Rebecca Thompson, the CEO of a sustainable manufacturing company, after one of my presentations. It's also the most effective way to build long-term profitability and market leadership. The validation from other business leaders has been gratifying, but the real satisfaction comes from knowing that the choices I made during that difficult period after my birthday party have created opportunities and benefits for dozens of other people. The employees at Carter & Associates Marketing have better jobs. The scholarship recipients have educational opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. And the women in my mentoring program have access to guidance and support that helps them build their own financial independence. Most importantly, I have learned to trust my own judgment and value my own contributions. The woman who spent 25 years apologizing for taking up space now chairs board meetings, makes difficult decisions, and advocates for causes she believes in without seeking anyone's permission or approval. My 55th birthday is approaching, and I'm planning another celebration. This time, however, the guest list will include only people who respect and value the woman I have become, rather than the convenient role I once played in someone else's narrative. The invitations will go out next week, and I'm confident that everyone who attends will be there to celebrate Lisa Carter's authentic life, rather than her performance as someone else's supporting character. The transformation that began with my confrontation at that fateful birthday party has continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Last month, I received a call from Amanda Richardson, a journalist from Business Today magazine who wanted to interview me about the corporate restructuring at Carter & Associates Marketing. The article, titled "From Betrayal to Breakthrough: How One Woman Turned Personal Crisis into Professional Revolution," was published in their October issue and generated responses from women across the country who had faced similar challenges in their marriages and careers. Mrs. Carter, your story resonates with so many of our readers because it demonstrates that it's never too late to reclaim your power, Amanda had said during our interview. The emails and letters we've received since announcing this article have been overwhelming. Women are sharing their own stories of financial dependence, professional sacrifice, and the courage required to demand better treatment from the people closest to them. The magazine feature led to additional speaking opportunities and consulting requests from companies that wanted to improve their workplace culture and leadership practices. I found myself traveling to conferences in major cities, sharing the lessons learned from Carter & Associates Marketing's transformation with audiences of business leaders, HR professionals, and women's professional organizations. During one particularly memorable presentation in Chicago, a woman in the audience stood up during the question and answer session and shared her own story of discovering that her husband had been having an affair with his business partner while She supported his startup company with her inheritance money. Mrs. Carter, listening to your story has given me the courage to demand answers about my own financial situation, the woman said, her voice shaking with emotion. I've been afraid to rock the boat because I didn't think I had any alternatives. But you've shown me that knowledge is power, and I need to understand exactly what I'm entitled to protect. These interactions reinforced my understanding that my birthday party revelation had significance beyond my personal circumstances. The story had become a symbol of the possibility for transformation, even in situations that seemed hopeless or overwhelming. The woman who had stood silently by while her husband publicly humiliated her was now inspiring other women to examine their own relationships and advocate for their own interests. The ripple effects extended to my family relationships as well. Emma had decided to pursue her master's degree in education administration, partly inspired by watching her mother return to academic pursuits later in life. She enrolled in an evening program that would allow her to continue teaching while earning her advanced degree. Mom, seeing you discover your own capabilities and build a career on your own terms has made me realize that I don't have to limit my own ambitions, Emma told me during one of our weekly phone calls. I've always loved teaching, but I want to have a broader impact on educational policy and student outcomes. Your example has shown me that it's possible to reinvent yourself at any age. Marcus had also been influenced by the changes in our family dynamic. He had started questioning some of the assumptions about success and power that had guided his legal career, leading him to consider opportunities in public service law rather than the corporate track he had been following. Mom, watching you prioritize ethical practices and employee welfare over pure profit maximization has made me think about what kind of lawyer I want to be, Marcus said during a recent visit. I've been offered a position with the State Attorney General's office working on consumer protection cases. The salary is lower than what I make now, but the work feels more meaningful. The transformation in my relationship with both children had been one of the unexpected benefits of asserting my own identity. By refusing to continue playing the self-effacing supporting role, I had given them permission to see me as a complete person, with my own ambitions, capabilities, and values. The dynamic had shifted from them protecting or pitying their mother to respecting and learning from her. Tyler's college application essays had focused on themes of integrity, courage, and the importance of standing up for your principles even when it's difficult or uncomfortable. His guidance counselor had commented that his writing showed unusual maturity and depth of character for someone his age. Grandma Lisa, I wrote about you in my essay for Harvard, Tyler told me with pride during his senior year. I talked about how watching you handle everything with dignity and strength taught me that real power comes from doing the right thing, even when it costs you something important. The college admissions process had given Tyler opportunities to reflect on the lessons he had learned from witnessing the transformation of our family. His acceptance to several prestigious universities was accompanied by scholarship offers that recognized not just his academic achievements, but his character and leadership potential. The success of Carter & Associates marketing continued to exceed expectations throughout the second year of my active leadership. The company's client base had expanded to include several Fortune 500 corporations that specifically sought out agencies with strong ethical reputations and diverse leadership teams. Our revenue had increased by 120% since Robert's departure, while employee satisfaction scores remained consistently high. The growth had allowed us to implement additional programs that reflected my commitment to using business success as a platform for positive social impact. We established an internship program for college students from low-income families, providing not just work experience, but mentorship and career guidance that many of them couldn't access through traditional channels. One of our first interns, Jessica Rodriguez, was a first-generation college student whose parents had immigrated from Guatemala when she was 5 years old. Jessica's talent for digital marketing was obvious from her first week at the company, but her lack of professional connections and industry knowledge had made it difficult for her to envision a clear career path. Mrs. Carter, this internship has opened doors I didn't even know existed, Jessica said during her final presentation at the end of the summer program. Not only have I learned technical skills, but I've seen what it looks like when a company prioritizes integrity and treats employees as valued partners rather than disposable resources. Jessica's success in the program led to a full-time position offer after her graduation, and her trajectory became a model for other young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds who joined our team. The diversity of perspectives and experiences that these employees brought to our client work enhanced our creativity and effectiveness in ways that benefited everyone involved. The scholarship program I had established continued to grow and evolve as well. We had supported 12 women in returning to college over the past 2 years, with 8 of them completing their degrees and securing better employment opportunities as a result of their educational advancement. Maria Santos, our first scholarship recipient, had graduated summa cum laude with her business degree and accepted a promotion to operations manager at Carter & Associates Marketing. Her success had inspired other employees to pursue their own educational goals, creating a culture of continuous learning and professional development that strengthened the entire organization. Lisa, I want you to know that this scholarship didn't just change my career prospects, Maria said during the graduation celebration we hosted for her. It changed how I think about myself and what I'm capable of achieving. My daughters are watching me pursue my dreams, and they understand that their own possibilities are unlimited if they're willing to work for them. The multi-generational impact of the scholarship program had been something I hadn't anticipated, but found deeply rewarding. The women who received educational support were modeling ambition and perseverance for their children, creating ripple effects that would influence family dynamics for years to come. My involvement in community organizations had also expanded, as my confidence and influence grew. I had accepted a position on the board of directors for the Riverside Community Foundation, where I advocated for programs that supported women's economic empowerment and small business development. The foundation's annual budget had grown significantly during my tenure, partly because my business success had attracted other successful entrepreneurs and professionals who wanted to support similar initiatives. The network of relationships I had built through Carter & Associates Marketing provided access to potential donors and volunteers who shared my commitment to creating opportunities for others. Lisa, your vision for community development has transformed how we think about our mission, said Patricia Williams, the Foundation's executive director. Your emphasis on sustainable change through education and economic empowerment has attracted funding and support that we never had access to before. The foundation work had led to consulting opportunities with other nonprofit organizations that wanted to improve their fundraising effectiveness and community impact. I found myself applying business principles to social problems, using the strategic thinking skills I had developed in the corporate world to address issues like domestic violence, educational inequality, and economic development. One particularly meaningful project involved working with a shelter for women escaping abusive relationships. Many of the women who sought help from the shelter had been financially dependent on their abusers and lacked the resources or skills needed to establish independent lives for themselves and their children. These women need more than temporary housing, explained Dr. Michelle Adams, the shelter's director. They need job training, financial literacy education, and support networks that will help them build sustainable independence. Your experience with empowering women in the workplace could be invaluable in designing programs that actually work. The consulting work with the shelter led to the development of a comprehensive program that combined emergency services with long-term empowerment initiatives. We created partnerships with local businesses to provide job training and placement services, established financial literacy workshops, and developed mentorship programs that connected shelter residents with women who had successfully rebuilt their lives after leaving abusive relationships. The program's success attracted attention from state and federal agencies that were looking for innovative approaches to domestic violence prevention and survivor support. Within a year, our model was being replicated in communities across New England, with funding from grants that recognized the program's effectiveness in helping women achieve genuine independence rather than simply temporary safety. My personal life had continued to evolve as well, though in quieter ways than my professional and community activities. The house on Maple Ridge Drive had become a true sanctuary where I could pursue interests and hobbies that had been impossible during my marriage to Robert. The art studio I had created in Robert's former office had become a retreat where I could explore creative expression without judgment or external pressure. My paintings were amateur efforts, but the process of creating something purely for my own satisfaction was deeply fulfilling after years of focusing exclusively on other people's needs and expectations. Photography had become another passion, with weekend trips to capture New England's changing seasons, providing both artistic challenge and peaceful solitude. I had developed enough skill to contribute photographs to the marketing materials for several of the nonprofit organizations I supported, finding ways to combine my artistic interests with my commitment to community service. The book club that met monthly at my home had evolved into something resembling a salon, with conversations ranging from literature to politics to personal philosophy. The women who attended represented diverse backgrounds and perspectives, but they shared a common interest in examining their own lives thoughtfully and supporting each other's growth and development. Lisa, these gatherings have become essential to my emotional and intellectual well-being, said Dr. Sarah Mitchell during one of our discussions about aging, wisdom, and the courage required to live authentically. The conversations we have here are unlike anything else in my life. There's a level of honesty and mutual support that's rare in social relationships. The friendships that had developed through the book club had enriched my life immeasurably. After years of socializing primarily with couples connected to Robert's business network, I had discovered the pleasure of relationships based on genuine compatibility and shared interests rather than social or professional convenience. Carol Peterson remained my closest confidant, but the circle of women who provided friendship and support had expanded to include professionals, artists, activists, and entrepreneurs who challenged my thinking and encouraged my continued growth. These relationships were based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than the transactional dynamics that had characterized much of my social life during my marriage. The dating question was one that friends raised occasionally, though I had no interest in romantic relationships during this period of personal reconstruction. The idea of sharing my life with another person seemed both premature and unnecessary, given the satisfaction I was finding in my work, family relationships, and friendships. Lisa, don't you get lonely living by yourself after 25 years of marriage? Carol asked during one of our weekly coffee dates. I know Robert wasn't perfect, but surely you miss having a partner to share your life with. The question forced me to examine my feelings about solitude versus loneliness, and I realized that living alone felt like freedom rather than isolation. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions based purely on my own preferences and priorities without considering how they would affect another person's comfort or agenda. I think I'm still learning who I am when I'm not defined by someone else's needs and expectations, I told Carol. Maybe someday I'll be interested in sharing my life with a partner. But right now, I'm enjoying the process of becoming fully myself without having to negotiate or compromise. The legal aspects of my divorce from Robert had been finalized 6 months earlier, marking the official end of our 25-year marriage. The final court hearing had been brief and unemotional, with both attorneys presenting the settlement agreement we had negotiated and the judge approving the terms without comment. Robert had not attended the hearing, leaving his attorney to represent his interests in what was essentially a formality. I had chosen to be present partly to mark the official end of that chapter of my life, and partly to ensure that all aspects of the agreement were properly documented and enforceable. The financial settlement had been generous by most standards, providing Robert with enough resources to establish himself in Florida without leaving him dependent on my continued goodwill. The 2-year alimony agreement would expire soon, and I had no intention of extending it beyond the original terms. The separation had been clean and complete, with no shared assets or ongoing obligations that would require future contact. Robert's relocation to Florida had been part of the settlement agreement, ensuring that we wouldn't encounter each other in Riverside's social or business circles. Reports from mutual acquaintances suggested that Robert had struggled to rebuild his professional reputation in his new location. The marketing industry was smaller and more interconnected than many people realized, and word of his termination from Carter and Associates Marketing had followed him to Florida, despite his attempts to control the narrative. I heard from someone who knows Robert's new boss that he's having trouble adjusting to a subordinate role, Marcus had mentioned during a recent phone call. Apparently, he keeps trying to present himself as the former CEO of a successful agency, but everyone knows he was fired by his own wife for bringing his mistress to a family event. The information was interesting, but no longer emotionally relevant to me. Robert's struggles to rebuild his career and reputation were consequences of his own choices, and I felt no responsibility for helping him manage those consequences or for protecting him from their social and professional impact. Jennifer Walsh had apparently thrived in her new position with the Boston advertising agency, at least according to the industry publications that occasionally mentioned her work on successful campaigns. Whether she had learned the lessons about integrity and professional ethics that she had claimed during her visit to my home remained an open question, but her career trajectory suggested that she was capable of success when she applied her talents ethically. The contrast between Jennifer's apparent success and Robert's struggles reinforced my understanding that talent and ambition without ethical grounding ultimately lead to self-destruction. Jennifer had been complicit in Robert's betrayal of our marriage, but she had also been younger and less experienced when she made those poor choices. Robert, at 55, had no excuse for the judgment failures that had cost him everything he had spent decades building. As my 55th birthday approaches, I find myself reflecting on the incredible journey that began with that confrontation at the Riverside Country Club 2 years ago. The woman who stood at that microphone and exposed her husband's betrayal while revealing her own hidden power was taking the first step in a transformation that continues to this day. The business success, community recognition, and personal fulfillment I have achieved since then are all connected to that moment of choosing truth over comfortable deception. By refusing to accept Robert's rewriting of our shared history and insisting on acknowledgement of my own contributions, I set in motion changes that have benefited not just me, but dozens of other people whose lives have been touched by the ripple effects of that decision. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to claim our own power and use it wisely. My birthday party confrontation with Robert 2 years ago was just the beginning of that journey. The real celebration has been everything. That came after. The discovery of my own capabilities, the development of authentic relationships, the opportunity to make a positive impact on other people's lives, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your own values, rather than someone else's expectations. Carter and Associates Marketing will continue to grow and evolve under leadership that prioritizes ethical practices and employee empowerment. The scholarship program will support more women in achieving their educational goals. The nonprofit work will create opportunities for people who face systemic barriers to economic advancement. And I will continue to discover new aspects of my own potential as I navigate this chapter of life with confidence, wisdom, and gratitude for the courage that made it all possible. The invitations for my 55th birthday celebration have been sent, and the responses have been overwhelmingly positive. The guest list includes only people who know and respect the authentic Lisa Carter, rather than the accommodating wife I used to be. The evening will be a true celebration of transformation, growth, and the power of choosing truth over comfort. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.